The tenant was ready to open on Monday. Then, during the final walkthrough, someone noticed that a new door had changed a shared access workflow. The construction was nearly complete, the schedule was tight, and nobody could answer one basic question. Who owned the fix?
That is exactly how a local request becomes a building problem.
And by the time it is discovered, the wall is closed, the ceiling is finished, and everyone is asking why operations was not in the room earlier.
Right. Welcome to Built, Wired, and Secured. I'm Alex Morgan. Today, we're looking at the tenant change test, a practical way to find the assumptions hiding between tenant space and base building systems before they become delays, rework, or an operational surprise. Michael, James, thanks for joining me.
Glad to be here. The word that causes trouble is often just. We just need to move a door. We just need one more connection. We just need to close the ceiling. But a building is a collection of shared services, and the first question should be, what breaks if this goes down?
Exactly. The best day in operations is the one nobody notices. A change should meet the tenant's need without creating a new mystery for the facilities team 6 months later.
Let's use one fictional but familiar example throughout. A tenant divides a large suite into smaller rooms, adds a door, moves a ceiling, and requests a new network connection. On paper, that sounds manageable. Where does the first assumption usually hide?
Usually in the boundary. People assume the tenant area is the tenant system, and everything outside it belongs to the building. That is too simple. A device can be inside the suite, while the power, pathway, network service, control logic, or maintenance responsibility belongs somewhere else.
That distinction is easy to miss.
It is. Take the new door in our example. The door may be part of the tenant's fit-out, but the access event could feed a shared security workflow. The cable may serve one suite, but use a common pathway. The location tells you where the change is happening. It does not tell you who needs to be involved.
So instead of asking only who owns this device, the better question is,
what does it connect to and who depends on it? Yes, I would add who has to maintain it and can they still reach it after the renovation?
And who responds when it behaves unexpectedly. That is where the real boundary often appears. If the tenant uses the service, the building supports the pathway, and a facilities or security team responds to the problem, then the change is shared, whether or not the drawing says so.
Which means the tenant change test is not a giant approval process. It is a way to discover who and what the change touches before the design is fixed.
Exactly. I would screen 3 things. Where is the boundary? What shared dependencies cross it? And how will the result be operated, supported, and reversed if the outcome is different from the plan?
Let's follow that suite renovation into the work itself. The tenant asks for a network connection near the new rooms. What should the team look at besides the outlet on the wall?
Start with the path, not the outlet. Where does the connection travel? Does it use a shared pathway or building telecommunications room? Is the supporting power available? Who can inspect and repair it later? A connection that works on opening day is not necessarily a connection the building can support safely and consistently.
And that is where a project can technically succeed and operationally fail. The new connection works, but the pathway is inaccessible, the labeling is unclear, or equipment is surrounded by finishes that make service difficult. A contractor can complete a connection and leave behind something that works,
but nobody knows how to service it 6 months later. Exactly. That is fine until it fails, and then the tenant experiences the delay immediately.
So the project team needs to ask not only, can we connect this space, but can the building support and maintain that connection without creating trouble for other occupants?
Yes, reliability starts with disciplined maintenance, and maintenance starts with practical access. That is not glamorous, but it is what keeps a small tenant request from becoming an emergency call.
Now, take the new door. The hardware may be in the tenant suite, but the operating effect can reach much farther.
A door changes how people move, how staff respond, and how the space is supported. It may affect access events, alarms, visitor procedures, or the timing of a routine service visit. The review does not need to become dramatic. It does need to answer what people will experience when the door works normally, when it is unavailable, and when someone needs help.
I agree with the review. I am less comfortable when teams describe the change as small, simply because the construction effort is small. A minor door adjustment can create a permanent expectation that the building will support a new workflow.
I understand that, but a 2-hour review for every outlet move or door adjustment will make project teams stop calling facilities. We need proportionality.
I agree, but proportionality means a lightweight screen, not skipping the screen. 5 focused questions can prevent a month of rework. The mistake is treating coordination as either a major committee or no conversation at all.
Fair. A short conversation with the right people is usually enough to identify whether the change is truly local or only appears local.
That is a useful distinction. Proportional review, not no review. In our suite, there is one more complication. The ceiling is closed after the room is divided, and a sensor now sits behind the new layout. James, what happens next?
The system may continue reporting normal values, while the space no longer matches the assumptions behind the operating sequence. A sensor can be covered, airflow can change around it, or equipment can be moved into a different condition. The result may be comfort complaints, wasted energy, or a facilities team chasing symptoms instead of finding the changed assumption.
And that is a particularly dangerous kind of surprise, because nothing has obviously failed.
Right. The equipment is alive, the screen looks normal, and the room still feels wrong. Technology should support operations, not complicate them. Before changing the physical environment, understand what the existing system believes that environment is.
Service access belongs in that same conversation. If the renovation blocks a panel, changes a route, or requires a new escort process, the building team may be unable to perform routine work as planned. Tenants feel this immediately when a simple service visit becomes disruptive or delayed.
So, before the design is finalized, who needs to be at the table?
The property or owner representative, facilities, the tenant, and the contractor. Add IT or security when the change touches their service. The tenant describes the desired outcome in plain language. Facilities explains maintenance and operating impacts. The property team clarifies responsibility. Then everyone asks what stays the same, what changes, and what must be verified before the space is occupied.
And ask what happens if the new service is not ready on day 1. Can the work be staged? Is there a temporary operating method? Can the prior condition be restored?
That sounds less like pessimism and more like protecting the schedule.
Exactly. A schedule that depends on one untested assumption is not really a schedule. It is a hope with dates attached.
From an operational standpoint, testing should reflect the real scenario. For the door, check the expected user flow and the response when the service is unavailable. For the changed room, check how the environment behaves under normal use. For connectivity, confirm not just that the service works, but that the support path is understood.
Test what people and operators actually experience. A component can pass while the workflow fails.
And after the test?
Record the decision while the decision is still fresh. Who approved the change? What dependency was identified? What was tested? Who owns the next action? It does not need to be a giant document. It needs to be clear enough that the next property or facilities team is not forced to rediscover the reasoning.
Documentation often fails because people treat it as the final task. By then, the space is opening and everyone is moving on. A short operational note written during the change can be more useful than a perfect record that arrives after nobody remembers why the ceiling, door, or sensor was handled that way.
Curious. Let me turn this into something a listener could put on the agenda tomorrow. Michael, what is the question teams forget most often?
Who operates the affected service every day, and who responds when it behaves differently from the plan? Not just the organization. Identify the role that can explain it, approve an interruption, and respond afterward.
And can that person still reach and maintain the system after the work is complete?
Yes, that is the question behind the question. What breaks if this goes down? And what is the recovery path?
Then the conversation guide is simple. Where is the boundary? What else depends on the affected service? What is the operational impact? How will the change be tested or reversed? And what needs to be documented for the next person?
That works for a small renovation and a major fit-out. The depth changes, but the questions stay useful. Trust the process, involve operations before the design is locked, and make sure someone can maintain the result.
The goal is not to slow tenant work down. It is to keep a fast project from becoming a slow recovery. A well-coordinated change meets the tenant's need, preserves shared services, and leaves responsibility clearer than it was before.
That is the tenant change test. Locate the boundary, expose the shared dependency, and coordinate the change through testing, rollback planning, and documentation. Before your next tenant change meeting, put those questions on the agenda and ask each responsible team to answer one.
That wraps up this episode of Built, Wired, and Secured. Today, we explored how a tenant change that appears local can depend on shared connectivity, security, automation, access, power, and maintenance practices. Thanks for spending a few minutes with us. Until next time, make sure the systems you're responsible for are built to last, wired with intention, and secured for the real world.